Coming up on this edition of VCU In Depth, documentaries from students in VCU's Robertson School of Media and Culture.
We'll start off with a glimpse into the underground music scene affiliated with punk and other counterculture movements in Richmond during the 70s and 80s.
And then we take a dive into the plant-based lifestyle of the century.
VCU In Depth begins right now. Good evening and welcome to VCU In Depth. I'm Erin McEwen.
And I'm Jackie Petrus. Thanks for joining us as we feature documentaries from undergraduate students in VCU's Robertson School of Media and Culture. When people think of counterculture music and art in the 1970s and 80s, most associate it with the punk scene of New York's Lower East Side or the straight-edge hardcore movement of Washington, D.C. However, one East Coast city known today for its vibrant display of public art and budding alternative music scene has quite a unique history that is often overlooked by those outside its outer limits.
To have a perspective on what the counterculture in Richmond during the 70s and 80s had to offer is to seek out its remaining members who still reside here. Their stories are told in this documentary called River City Underground, with only flyers and photographs to paint the picture.
Hi, I'd like to see the Richard Bland flyer collection.
Sure.
And I'll be honest with you, I didn't get it at first. You know, I came to VCU wanting to be a hippie because I had an older brother who was in the whole hippie thing, and I loved the hippies. I loved the Crosby, Stills and Nash and the Beatles and all that. And I went to a small private school where we had to keep our hair short, couldn't grow facial hair, and then I get to VCU and suddenly everybody was into punk, and I didn't get it at first. It took a while for me to understand it. And I was like, what the heck is going on here? And I didn't get it. And then in Schaefer Court, people were throwing glass, you know, and I didn't get it. Then at some point or another, I was at some show and I started getting it. And then I started hanging out with some of the guys in some bands and I started getting it.
It wasn't like flipping a switch. I mean, rock became punk. Punk became a thing right around 76 or so, when a few seminal bands appeared. But there were bands that were, you'd call them punk, even though nobody used that term. You know, before that in Richmond, there was a club that was just an old dive bar on Main Street. It's dorms now. It was right across the street from Monroe Park, and it was called Benny's. And it was just kind of a dump. It was just a dive bar with a really cool owner, and they would pack people in there. It was always just wild. And these were the punkiest bands in town played at Benny's. Iggy Pop played there one night. He was in town for a show he had done.
So we had Iggy Pop. We had like 3 or 4 bands before then. 40 kegs of beer had been imbibed. And he comes out, his eyes were bugged so wide open, like I don't know what he was on, you know. And he had this, it was almost like superhero muscles. I mean, like there was, every part of his body was muscular, but he's wearing stockings, you know, and I'm like, what am I seeing? So it was a cultural shock to me. And I couldn't even hear the music because I just couldn't believe what I was seeing, and it was right in front of me. And then the riots started, and then that became the focus of everything because they cut off the sound and everybody started throwing beer cans and cinder blocks and chairs and all this stuff, and it turned into a riot. But hey, that's punk.
I came to Richmond in 1977, and I'll never forget, I'd been here 2 months. I came from a rural part of the state, so it was a culture shock for me to come here. But nothing prepared me for going to the 1977 VCU Halloween dance at the old gym on Franklin. The Ramones were playing that year. They didn't impact me as much as a band called Ricky and the White Boys, who led off. They were Richmond's first true punk band. I'd never seen anything like that before. Ralph Harper, lead singer, he was on the ground, he was growling, he was spitting, I'd never seen anything like it, I'd never heard anything like it or seen anything like it. I left that show a changed person. Not because of the Ramones, it was Ricky and the White Boys.
And the first time I ever saw slam dancing, we had these brick walls, and these guys are throwing each other against the walls. I grew up in the 70s in high school where this was dancing, staying alive, right? Then you get in there and it's sweating and you're bouncing and you're moving around and you're like, all right, this is a good vibe.
And so there were just so many places to play. So there were just always bands happening. There were a few bands started to get national attention to some level. Bands from Richmond, Susie Saxon and the Anglos, The Good Guys, The Dads, 1010, House of Freaks, Single Bullet Theory. All of these had some sort of interest from record labels, and some actually had releases and got varying levels of attention.
But you want to talk about punk, and a lot can be debated about punk rock in Richmond and internationally. There was a band that played here for a while called the Degenerate Blind Boys. Now, if any band ever perfectly encapsulated the punk philosophy that was espoused by the Sex Pistols, it was the Degenerate Blind Boys. And Dickie Disgusting, the lead singer, the short, ugly, skinny punk kid. They were the ones who kicked the pumpkin full of fish guts into the crowd at Newgate Prison at a Halloween show and created a riot. They were terrible musicians, admittedly, but it was the persona that was created around them. But there was a riot right there at Newgate Prison too, and that drew the attention of the cops, and that you never want that to happen, because once the cops show up once, they'll show up forever. And eventually they'll drive you out, and that's what happened to Newgate.
I don't know, it seemed to us like there was a vendetta against the club and everything, and it's probably just our imagination, like, they want the property, they're trying to run us out, because they were enforcing a lot of laws and sending like undercover cops in and stuff who weren't very undercover at all. I mean, we knew them by name. We'd ask them for IDs at the door and they get mad and, man, here's my ID. Show their gun and stuff. Yeah, all right, man.
Everybody's job made them very little money, but they didn't have to have money because rent was so cheap. So we were this secret, we were able to like get our career started here. My friend started booking shows. I did flyers for them. So, I just was like, oh, I'll do a weird font and, go flyer the campus and, just turn in my hours. So it was a pretty slack job, and I got to doodle.
8.5 by 11 Xerox black and white flyers. And, there was a whole flyer war thing going on in the 80s where, people were tearing down each other's flyers, and there was like an etiquette involved, and people would screw up and do things they shouldn't do, and the city came around and took everybody's posters down.
The city would come along and burn them off because they got so thick. But they said it was basically vandalism or an eyesore law, that type of thing. And I was like, yeah, well, we're like third per capita in murder, and there's trash everywhere anyway, so these people are just trying to make a living. That's not, the flyers are not the problem.
The rest of Richmond said, you want to keep it right there on Gray Street around VCU, fine. And VCU got a reputation, VCU for a while stood for Viet Cong University, because people said, there's a bunch of communist hippies going there, but throughout, one thing too you have to realize about counterculture in Richmond is it was very individual based. It was the power of personalities that drove the counterculture back then.
VCU was like this little oasis in the middle of a Confederate city. There were all kinds of outlets for media. There were all kinds of little magazines going around.
Me and some friends from the Commonwealth Times had published some little one-shot publications. In January or December of 1980, we decided, well, let's do another one, but let's do a big one this time. And so we created the first Throttle. And what was so good about Throttle was that we were given a voice to these, and we were reviewing their shows. We were sending people, we were taking pictures. So people were seeing them and they were seeing the club, they're saying, whoa, look at what's going on in Richmond. We were helping each other by doing that. It was a great relationship for a while with the bands, but what goes up must come down. All of a sudden our ad base started crumbling. It was basically the volatility of the band scene.
Well, I've been through it personally. Rock and roll is not when you get there on that sort of level, it's not the job that you applied for. It's not what you thought it was.
Richmond is a hard place to leave. People leave to go do stuff outside of Richmond. They go to LA to try to make it big. It didn't work, so they came back. And it's such a good place to live, Richmond, that I think a lot of people don't want to leave. And so therein lies a conflict.
I mean, it was a ghost town. It was just boarded up, and it was crime, and dude, nothing was open. No one wanted to be here, you know, and so that is a perfect breeding ground for good art.
Other cities may have experienced something similar, but nothing was quite like Richmond's, I don't think. And it was really what started the RVA philosophy, I think.
It was something I'd always kind of wanted to see or be a part of.
Here was just wide open. If I saw one more documentary on DC, I'd want to vomit, because it's like, yeah, it's great. You know, everyone knows about that. But Richmond's about fun, art, experimentation. You know, there's a long history of that. Richmond has such a great history. I just hope it continues.
I think it's just out and out, kiss my ass, we're doing something different. You know, so it's awesome.
I'm Bill Oglesby, an associate professor in VCU's Robertson School of Media and Culture and the instructor for the documentary class. Joining me tonight are Hayden Molchen and Adam Harrell, who produced the River City Underground documentary. That was a good job, guys.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Only two of you. Normally we have three here.
Well, we are the dream team.
Okay.
So,
You're the dream team. Okay. Well, let me ask you, what you could have chosen a lot of different topics, but you chose this one. Why, Hayden?
Well, the music scene personally to me means a lot, because I got started around 2011 when I was in high school, and I was thinking that was it. That was what was drawing people to Richmond, but really it goes so much deeper than that. Back in the 70s and 80s, and what's weird is that East Coast is always remembered for punk up in New York and DC and stuff like that, but there's this big hole down here in the South, here in Richmond, and Richmond had such a unique scene to it, and not a lot of people really know about it. And it's so great because everyone that was in the scene still lives in the area. So
yeah,
I feel like it was doing them justice by having it somewhat memorialized in a video.
Well, you touched on that, and you think of Richmond today as a little bit of a hipster vibe going on in the city, and I'm sure a lot of it stems from what went on then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Adam, let me ask you. What was the most enjoyable part to you of making this documentary?
I like how we kind of incorporated the reenactments into storytelling itself, like how with them explaining the flyer wars, you saw both of us put up flyers and then tear down flyers, acting like, oh, we were part of the 1970s, like with them himself. And with the bottle opening scene, how it crashed against the fence, we dumpster dived behind his house, probably about for like 5 minutes. Luckily, we found 2 like empty bottles, so that's like one of my favorite parts, along with working with this gentleman right here.
Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, you've got to be creative when you're dealing with historical things like that, where you've got a limited number of items, especially ones that move. You've got flyers and all that, but not a lot of moving video. So I thought you did a nice job of covering for that. How did you find the interview subjects that you chose?
Well, the first one was Eric, who actually came and did a presentation at our class. And when we proposed the topic to him, he's like, oh, I can help you with this big time. And he was actually the first person to bring us a picture, which was the Iggy Pop picture that we used for the cover. And then from there, he recommended Ray Bonas, who's almost like the broker for all of the context that we used. And he recommended Jerry Williams, and Jerry recommended Barry Fitzgerald and Wes Freed.
It just went on from there.
Just a domino effect.
Okay. Well, good job, guys. I've been speaking with Robertson School students and documentary producers Hayden Molchen and Adam Harrell. Nice trip back in time, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Oglesby. The vegan trend has quadrupled in just 5 years, according to some sources. Whether it's a healthier lifestyle, animal welfare issue, or the environmental impact, There are many reasons people are deciding to go vegan.
With all the education and statistics finding a connection between animal products and heart disease, more Americans are becoming curious of a healthy alternative. Our next documentary, Try Vegan, is here to shine a light on some serious plant-based passion.
We are the Richmond, Virginia chapter of Direct Action Everywhere. We have a quick message of compassion, love, and empathy for you today. I hope you'll pay attention.
I noticed the dissonance, the cognitive dissonance about loving animals and advocating for them and also consuming them. And also like exploiting them for, you know, whether it's leather or fur, etc. And so I made the executive decision to start cutting out meat. And I did it relatively gradually, but then when I decided to go vegan, I quit all animal byproducts altogether.
I don't sit down at a table unless it's vegan food, unless it's all vegan. Like if there's any animal products at all, or there's going to be, I won't go. I won't partake in it out of solidarity with the victims.
People are vegan for different reasons. Some people it's health reasons, some people it's political, some people it's animal justice, you know, social equality, that kind of thing. It's really up to each person.
I met a girl, she's now my wife, and she actually was the first person I came across who was vegan or vegetarian, who had scientific and health rationale for it, rather than ethical. The ethical did not move me at all at first.
For us, for me, for my husband too, our initial reaction to going vegan was, oh, we're gonna have to do without. We're gonna have to give up cheese. We're gonna have to give up. So we wanted substitutes for all that stuff. So we went to the store to look for meat substitutes and cheese substitutes, dairy substitutes, egg substitutes. But they were so gross. We got home and started looking at the labels of those things, and it was like this long list of ingredients that I didn't know what any of them were, and I just felt like I was eating worse food. My husband decided, you know what, we're just gonna eat vegetables and grains and fruits, and we're not even gonna try any of the fake things. We're just gonna do without.
Yeah, there's so many like incalculable ways to do veganism incorrectly. But when you do it correctly, which is just, you know, going to the store and getting like a cheap box of like rice and then some vegetables, and then like maybe some tofu if you want, et cetera, et cetera. Like legumes are easy ways to get proteins as well. It's really, really easy.
If you're gonna try a vegan diet or think about veganism and explore that, you've gotta face that head on. You have to think about the ethics. And for a lot of people, that's the motivation for eating vegan food. And the ethics are really important to me. I don't like, you know, grocery store meat, feedlot meat, and eggs. Everyone feels terrible about that, right? Nobody wants to eat those animals.
Initially, it was logic, and that's why I strapped to veganism so quickly. You know, I'd never heard of it. I didn't, you know, no one ever talked to me about it. I never heard the message, and as soon as I heard it, that was it. Okay. Like the next day, you know, so.
The fact that, you know, animals are exploited and abused and, you know, subsequently slaughtered every day, every second. And so that was something that I'm not comfortable with.
I read an article about the slaughterhouse workers, and I'm not saying this happens at every single one, but if it's happening at some, it's got to be happening more often than not. And they're talking about, there were some stat that every week, like 1 or 2 people lose a limb, because it's dangerous. I mean, they're breaking down
bodies, like
body parts. So it's like
animals, like they're using big saws and fast, repetitive motions.
The exploitation of indigenous and migrant workers in meat and dairy facilities. They suffer from much higher levels of mental illness and suicidal ideations and PTSD because of what they have to do to put, you know, food on their families' tables. This oftentimes, includes, slitting animals' throats themselves, hanging them up while they're still alive and skinning them. It's very, very taxing for anyone, but especially someone who is just trying to make ends meet.
It's a human rights issue just as much as it is an animal rights issue. Until non-human animals are included in every conversation with regards to ethics and morality, nothing's changing. Humans have been at war with each other forever, since the beginning of time, right? And since the beginning of time, we've neglected the rights and the lives of non-human animals. So how can we expect the world to get any better if we're not willing to change ourselves? And the first form of hatred that we learn is love the cats and dogs and kill the pigs. That's where it's rooted from. That's where it stems from. And if you teach a child that every animal deserves to live free of harm, free of human oppression, how would those children grow up and oppress each other?
Another reason too why I promote veganism too is there's a lot of covert symbolism that you see objectifying women while also objectifying animals. So if you've ever read like Carol Adams' book, The Sexual Politics of Meat, it highlights all of these phrases that we have that like subsequently sexualize animals and women simultaneously. And so even you can go to like sometimes like the Piggly Wiggly signs have like heels on the pigs with like bikinis on, meaning that like conflating the two between, okay, you can dig into a pig just as much as you can dig into a woman. And so while it's more abstract, it's still palatable within our society.
And I just want to make this clear. I'm on board 100% ethics for the animals. But I think that more people are going to get on board initially for the environment. That might be what draws more people in.
Animal agriculture and animal husbandry is one of the worst pollutants on this planet right now. And I think a lot of people are like, well, you need to look also at like the fossil fuel industry, et cetera, et cetera. It's something like 40% of fossil fuels go actually into the production of animal agriculture, industrialized animal agriculture, I should say.
I mean, it's really terrible for the environment. Eating steaks, pig, it's not sustainable. You can't.
So in the future, we're going to have to stop.
Or some catastrophic climate event's going to happen.
There's if you like Vice, there's a Vice episode on the draining of the water tables.
The amount of water that's required for a pound of beef is like thousands and thousands of gallons of water. The amount of water that you have to feed the cow, the amount of water that you have to give to the crops to feed the cow first. It's completely inefficient and so wasteful, especially when people are dying of thirst and hunger where you're from.
Technically under US federal law, I believe, anyone that speaks out against the dairy and meat industry is technically considered a terrorist. So, yeah. So, I mean, it's, again, a lot that goes into it.
We don't want to hurt animals if we don't have to. If I can be perfectly healthy and actually healthier by not causing any harm to any animals, which, we like looking at, we have pets, so why would we want to hurt them if we don't have to? It's an easy choice to make. Our bodies are finite, they have a shelf life, we want it to last as long as possible. Just like you take care of your bike, if you want it to last and not rust, you take care of your body, you exercise, you eat healthy food, you'll live longer.
I understand that if everybody in the world wants to eat meat, feedlots are our future, and I don't love that. And so I sort of hope that in the future, more people will choose to incorporate a vegan element into their diet and make more vegan choices and have meat occasionally, so that might be a little more sustainable, so that we can be eating animals that are raised in a more conscious way, in a more respectful way.
Joining me now are the student producers of Try Vegan, Taylor Jones, Fonku Joindia, and Lauren Kaup. And good job, guys. I thought we were going to have maybe a kitchen set out here or something.
No, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
What in the budget? All right. Taylor, let me start with you. Did making this documentary give you any thoughts about going vegan? Because I understand none of you actually are.
Yeah, actually definitely after watching all of the sad videos of the animals in the factories, that made me feel really bad and definitely makes me second guess eating red meat and meat in general. So I definitely am probably going to incorporate some vegan alternatives in my diet from now on, for sure.
Video like that is hard to watch.
Yeah.
It really is.
Definitely.
Fonku, why in particular did you choose this topic for the doc?
I don't know, I feel like as we become a more progressive society, I think we're going to have to talk about these things. Like, for example, what's the difference between a cow and a dog? What's the difference between a chicken and a cat, for example? So I think as we become more progressive, we are going to have these conversations. We cannot escape it, especially when it comes to climate change. And so we just wanted to be part of that conversation early on.
Okay,
yes.
Good. That's very aspirational. I like that. Lauren, what about any surprises? Was there anything surprising about doing this documentary?
Yeah, there was honestly so much. So I didn't know too much about veganism before this documentary, so almost everything we learned was super surprising to me. But I think one of the most surprising things was being able to find a vegan bodybuilder. I didn't even really know that was possible. So getting the chance to talk to him was amazing, because I mean, figuring out how to get your proteins that you need in order to lift weights like that, that was really interesting to find and learn about. And also just seeing how much water and fossil fuels goes into meat production. Just there was so many jarring aspects of the documentary that caught me off guard, but it was really cool to learn about. And also I have considered changing my diet some because it's been pretty crazy. Yeah.
There really are a lot of directions you can go with a documentary like this, aren't there? I mean,
definitely.
it's connected to so many different things. You've kind of mentioned that.
Definitely.
I mean, did you think that was going to happen when you got into doing this?
Yeah, I mean, I know we all struggled trying to figure out what to focus on because, I mean, even throughout our interviews, we found so many different ways to approach veganism. I mean, the food, environmental, so many different aspects, and it was hard to figure out which direction we wanted to go because there was just so much information.
So much you can do. Yes. Well, thanks, guys. We've been talking with documentary students Taylor Jones, Fonku Joindia, and Lauren Kaup. And it was a tough subject, but good job.
Well, that does it for this edition of VCU In Depth. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jackie Petrus.
And I'm Erin McEwen. From all of us at VCU In Depth, good night.